Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country and around the world, I am very, very humbled, thrilled, and inspired to have an incredible guest joining us for this episode. My dear friend, my dear mentor, and a true American hero, the great and powerful Bonnie Carroll. Welcome, Bonnie, to Angry Americans. It's so good to see you.
That's a humbling introduction, and back at you. You've been a mentor to me for many years, and thank you. We've really been on this journey together for a long time.
We have. It's been interesting. And I'm excited to get into it. Bonnie, I ask everyone when we start if you could first share, where are you in America, and what is it like where you are with the pandemic for you and the people around you?
Well, I'm actually just back in our national headquarters. There's only a few of us here, but we're in Arlington, Virginia. And this week we're kicking off our virtual National Military Survivor Seminar and Family Program. So we've got thousands of families of America's fallen heroes who are coming together, started last night, and gathering to find hope and healing. But right now I'm in Arlington, Virginia. The past 2 months, I've actually been home in Anchorage, Alaska.
Can you please talk about that? Because I was so curious to know if you had been in Alaska or not. And you are amazing in so many ways, but in particular, you have such endurance because you go back and forth from DC to Alaska pretty often. But what's it like in Alaska right now?
Oh, it's beautiful. When I got there, March 18th, we actually were in the midst of snowstorms and winter. And I've been there just in the 2 months. We've transitioned to 24 hours of daylight, green grass, trees are blooming. The moose are calving. They're all over. It's adorable. So.
And what was it like going from Alaska to DC? Did it feel like you were far away from the pandemic and then deep in it? Or what was it like for you making that transition?
I'm very proud. Alaska's at the bottom of the scale of states. So we are, I think, number 49, hovering around 49, 50 in how we have been impacted by COVID. But Alaskans have been really, really strict about anyone coming into the state must quarantine for 14 days. There's a lot of the hunker down restrictions are in place. So, they've been very, very careful, like Hawaii has. Now
Alaska's kind of like the perfect place to be, right? I mean, it's so spread out. It's amazingly gorgeous. It's isolated from a lot of international and national travel. And it seems like people generally work really well together in Alaska, right? So there's a sense of respect and pioneership. So if there are ways to tackle something, that's kind of the Alaskan spirit, right? Is working together to tackle it.
It is, exactly. And it's actually been great to be home. One of our staff who works here at TAP, she's been here for a while. I knew she was a military spouse, and she told us that she was going to be moving from the DC area and was going to be going to Alaska. I thought, how great. So she and her husband PCS'd and arrived up there. And I said, Lisa, great. Well, wow, what does your husband do? What's his job going to be? Well, come to find out, he's the 3-star general in charge of the entire Pacific Rim. So it was,
wow.
Yeah, surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine Alaska is probably going to be similar to Maine and other places where there's going to be a need. People are going to want to move there. That might be their biggest challenge in the next couple of months. But it's
absolutely beautiful, and everybody has been outdoors. Of course, you can certainly be physically distanced from others, so it's absolutely beautiful. But my father-in-law was the first adjutant general of the Alaska National Guard. And he was killed up there after the 1964 earthquake. And then tragically, my husband was killed back in 1992 also. He was a general officer in the Army National Guard and was killed in another National Guard crash. So a really tragic legacy there. But that's kind of what led me into the work that I'm doing now with TAPS.
I want to drill down harder on that in a second, Bonnie, because I think it's such an important part of your origin story. You are a superhero, and every superhero has an origin story, and you have that origin story, and I want to get into it in a second. But when you're in Alaska or you're in DC, I have to ask you a question I ask of all of our guests. Bonnie Carroll, what is your drink of choice, your adult beverage of choice?
I am not a drinker, but every morning I start the day with a soy latte. So I don't know if that counts, but
You can drink whatever works for you,
That's it.
whatever keeps you going, because you have more energy and positivity than anybody I've ever known. And we were talking earlier, Bonnie, that you went to high school in Dutchess County in New York. You've lived all around the country and all around the world, including when you were in the military and now with TAPS. But when you were growing up, Bonnie Carroll, what was your first car?
Oh, it was a Camaro. I don't know if you remember that.
That's the Camaro behind me.
Oh,
For folks who are listening, you can't see it, but the
so awesome.
69 Camaro SS, still to be named. We haven't come up with a name yet for this Camaro. That's going to be a contest separately. But tell us more about the Camaro, please.
Oh my gosh. It was one of the last years they made kind of the big steel body. It was so heavy, and it was not a convertible like yours. It was kind of a cream color, but it was awesome. So that was a lot of fun.
Do you know what year it was?
Gosh, you're really pushing. I don't. I don't. That would.
How did you, Bonnie? How did you get your Camaro? Where did it come from?
Well, it was obviously very used, and so saved up my money and bought it. I think it was like $3,000.
Wow! And where was this that you were driving around in your cream colored Camaro?
Yeah, this was by this time, actually, we had just moved down to outside DC in Middleburg, Virginia.
Wow, that's cool. I just like that. I mean, we got to find that Camaro for you. Maybe we can get one of these 3-stars to go on a recon mission and try to find it out. So for folks that don't know, Bonnie, I want to get into your story and the amazing work you do. And I did a long intro kind of framing this up. But every leader I've been talking to since the pandemic hit has been a leader on the front lines of a different element of this war against the virus. And I've been wanting to get you on the show ever since I started this. Memorial Day is the perfect time, but you're also leading for your community and many communities in a really important way. So can you talk about how COVID and the pandemic has hit the communities you serve? Who are they and how have they been impacted so far?
Well, Paul, the American people have been there for the military for generations. And, you saw that after 9/11 when everybody stepped forward to just really support the troops. And now we're seeing the troops are there for the citizens of this country, for the first responders, for the healthcare workers, where we've got National Guardsmen who are guarding those who are doing the COVID testing. And, our civilian population is kind of a bit in the circumstance that our military families have been now for the past 15, 20 years. We're in a situation where there's a lot of isolation. That's what military families feel. And when a military family sends their loved one off to war, they have this sense of angst and anxiety that will their loved one come back? And you know what? Now we're feeling that when they go to the grocery store, when they go out in public, are they going to come back healthy? A lot of the rituals are disrupted. A lot of the permission to grieve and to mourn, it's all turned upside down. There's a term called shattering the assumptive reality, and that's what's happening now in America. Many of the things that we held to be true are now thrown up in the air, and we're completely having to think differently. But there's a lot we can learn from what military families have experienced. And we have a lot of that on our website. The taps.org/COVID site has tons of resources that are available to absolutely everybody. And we want to be there to provide support now and have the backs of our civilian counterparts.
Folks who know you, Bonnie, sometimes call you Saint Bonnie, right? Because you're there so many times. I remember when we lost Clay Hunt, you were the first, our friend Clay Hunt, who was a co-founder of Team Rubicon and a real inspiration for so many people. When we lost him to suicide, you were, I think, the first person I called, and you were there within 24 hours to come to DC. We were leading Storm the Hill with IAVA, and you and your team came in time and time again. You were there, but in the darkest of night, in the latest of hours, under the most trying circumstances. But can you shape up, Bonnie, how many people you serve, shape the demographics of the survivor community and the broader military community, or however you define it. Help for people who maybe are farther away from it and only think about it on Memorial Day. How many people and who do you serve at TAPS?
We're serving all those grieving the loss of a military loved one. And Paul, I just talked with Susan Clay's mom this week. She's attending our virtual seminar. And very much now, she is herself a peer mentor in
Awesome.
TAP. But last year in 2019, we had just shy of 7,000 new surviving family members who came to TAPS, grieving the loss of a military loved one. You know, a lot of people think the war is over or there aren't that many losses, but we're seeing a very high rate of loss still to suicide and also to illnesses, many as a result of toxic exposures.
Can you break that down, Bonnie? I remember in the past we were talking, and it was, maybe post 9/11, a high percentage of the people you were serving were killed in action, right? And then you had training accidents are always a part of that. Just the dangerous job that people do in the military. And then we saw a rise in suicides, and now it seems like we're seeing a rise in cancer and burn pit exposure. Can you shape up how that distribution has changed and where you think it's going in the future now?
Yeah, this in 2019, for the first time, illness loss was at the same rate, about one third of those coming to TAPS, as suicide loss. And that's, as our families say, our loved ones brought the war home with them. So they are definitely combat casualties, but under those circumstances. So two-thirds of the losses were illness and suicide.
Wow. And I think it's important for folks to remember, there's still fighting and dying going on in places like Afghanistan. And now you've got COVID, right? This whole new front. And when I was thinking about the USS Roosevelt and these people who were the sailors who were getting impacted by COVID-19, I think it was a Master Chief that died. What I told people is Bonnie's going to be there for that type of family too. So can you talk about what kind of need you've been seeing that's new after COVID, and just the overall stress that COVID's putting on the force?
Absolutely. One of the areas we've been really concerned about are the National Guardsmen who have been there on the front lines doing testing and not always with the right protective equipment and not in the right duty status. Sometimes they're in a state duty status and sometimes in a federal status. There was a National Guardsman, a physician's assistant, who died of COVID in New Jersey, but in a state status. His family did not get the same benefits, protections, and care that the family of the sailor who died out on the Teddy Roosevelt did. So TAPS put forward legislation. We got together with all of the veteran service organizations and the National Guard Bureau, and that has gone through now to give additional protections to guardsmen.
Awesome. I mean, one of the things that you've taught me how to do, and I think have inspired many to do, is you think of the problem holistically at a strategic level, with the policy change, with the legislation change. I don't know if there's anybody that's more respected inside the Pentagon than you. I mean, the Pentagon, every chairman of the Joint Chiefs knows you, their families know you, they know they can rely on you, but then at the same time, you're doing the individual case management, right? Like at the individual point of pain. Where people are facing an unimaginable loss and an unimaginable experience. You've been, you've been in the streets of Afghanistan helping widows. You've been, standing with me at the White House for bill signing ceremonies. And on a very basic level, you and I have talked about this, Bonnie. TAPS is so necessary and so essential, and I hope everybody listening will donate and support. But it's outrageous to me that you have to even raise money, that you have to ask for the people of the country to donate, that you don't have every resource and weapon you need. And so, I've always been a bit outraged about that. I mean, even if only on your behalf, but I wonder how you see it. And, the question I ask of everyone, Bonnie Carroll, what makes you angry?
Well, it is tough to fundraise for the families when, everybody in America certainly supports those. We have a National Day of Remembrance to honor those who have served and died. And yet we have families who are really struggling out there. They are the living legacies of our nation's service and sacrifice. And we are so grateful when folks donate. But I appreciate you saying that, Paul, and thank you for being our champion. It's really, really the best. Thank you.
I gotta have your back. You have our back. But you're also so good and so positive. But I gotta drill down now that I'm in the meeting. What something must make you angry. What Bonnie Carroll, does anything make you angry? Righteously angry? We talk about, the righteous anger of George Washington or Martin Luther King or Harvey Milk or so many others. Is there something in particular that makes you angry?
Oh, Paul, you know, I tell you, what our families have been through, what I've been through with the loss of my husband, and it's been a long road. You know, anger is part of grief, and we come out of that to the other side and transform that into gratitude.
Mm,
And a big part of what TAPS has discovered and what we help families understand is we only grieve because we love.
mm,
And that, you know, grief isn't a mental illness, it isn't a physical injury. I wish we could just take a pill or put a bandage on it, but we can't. The only thing we can do is come together with each other, find that support, find that community of care, and acknowledge that that love that we have for those we've lost lives on, that it
mm,
transcends the physical. You know, this is really important for kids because that's always going to be their dad or their mom or their big brother, big sister, their loved one. And, you know, they're going to redefine that relationship, and they're still going to love that person.
mm.
And they're probably still going to draw on who that person was to inspire them throughout their life. So we do work, you know, gosh, so much with family members who are just angry at God, angry at circumstances, at the military, at whatever. And we can just kind of very gently bring that into a place of
Mm.
finding hope and gratitude and that love.
I was so looking forward to having this part of the conversation with you because you know how real the anger is, and you see a kind of natural response to this terrible situation. You all, I remember when Joe Biden, I think for maybe one of the first times, talked about his grief and the loss of his wife and child in a very open way. Like he spoke about it at a TAPS event, I think, in a way he had never before, talking about his personal burden and the fact that, you know, I don't know if he said specifically, but suicide had entered his mind, or he thought about that world for the first time, and he connected with people in such a vulnerable and powerful way. You are such a master of turning emotion into something positive. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and maybe specifically what you've seen with Vice President Biden and other public people, in how they've shifted and turned it into something positive?
Absolutely. And, you know, when Vice President Biden and Jill were with us, you know, he did talk with the families. And what he said was, you know, at that point, I just didn't know if I could go on, if I
Mm,
wanted to go on. And all of our families were right there with him. That's, you know, when you lose a loved one, death is right there. It's something that is very, very present in your life. You wonder, where is my loved one now? And why can't I be with them? And when I die, will I be with them again? I had the opportunity, very sadly, to be with one of our surviving widows when she passed recently. And in one of our final conversations, she said that she wasn't afraid of death, that she looked at it as now a transition and that she would be with her husband again. So I think you know, for our families and what he was expressing is, you know, death kind of takes on a different meaning for us. But it's certainly, suicide is a very different challenge. And TAPS has spent a lot of time now working with our families who have had a loss of a loved one to suicide, really understanding, you know, from them what led up to that. What were all of these contributing factors that led to this one moment in time? Suicide is a very complex, complicated, multi-factor event. It isn't just that one trigger, that one moment. And the more we can understand about what those factors are, and I think you'd be surprised by some of them, the more we can help prevent future suicides.
mm. Bonnie, you've been such an inspiration to so many because you have experienced it yourself, right? And that has such important credibility and connection with the community and the communities you serve. And I know a lot of folks are going to be listening to this and are dealing with loss or dealing with what might be maybe the lowest point of their life. You're there on the darkest of days, and you've helped me understand. I think you've told me once, you know, we mourn the loss, but we celebrate the life, and the framework in the way you approach it. But can you tell the story of your husband and how TAPS started for folks who don't know it?
Oh, I'd love to. That's my favorite story. I was working in the West Wing of the White House and was the only reservist or National Guardsman who was also on staff. That was my civilian job. So when this whale rescue was going on up in Barrow, Alaska, of all places, the president came to me and he goes, now, Bonnie, he said, you're in the National Guard. He goes, call up there, call someone you know. He said, don't call the Pentagon, they'll be up all night. So just, gonna call informally, see how we can help. How can the White House, how can the government help? So I called someone I knew who knew someone, and pretty soon I was talking with Tom Carroll up in Barrow, Alaska. And we were together from that phone call on. So it was just such a blessing. In 2012, there was a movie that came out, Big Miracle, with Drew Barrymore and John Krasinski, Ted Danson, Kristen Bell. It was about the whale rescue, but it really is also our story. And the movie actually ends with our wedding. So that was
it's such an incredible story. And tell folks, who played you in the movie?
Well, Vanessa Shaw played me, and Dermot Mulroney played my husband. So
I mean, it was a legendary story that we all have heard, and to see it on the big screen. Now, this was when Ronald Reagan was president, right? So you're working in the White House with Ronald Reagan. Can you share, what was it like working with Reagan, being around Reagan? What are your impressions of him? And for folks who didn't see the movie, can you give them a little bit of a tidbit in what you all actually pulled off during that time period?
Wow, it was absolutely amazing. Well, there were these 3 whales who had gotten stuck in the ice near shore when the rest of the sea had started to freeze over. So now it was frozen too far for them to actually get out from under it and get to open water. So the Eskimos came, and then there were folks from Greenpeace who were trying to protect the whales. They came and they're trying to free the whales. And the oil company got involved, and the National Guard came in to kind of oversee the whole operation. And ultimately, Tom called me and he said, we're at a point now where there's what's called a pressure ridge of ice. And we're just not going to be able to break through it, even though we've kind of gotten the whales in these little air holes all the way close to it. And he said, but there is a Soviet icebreaker that's close enough that could get here and could actually maybe break through this. Would President Reagan call Mikhail Gorbachev and ask him to bring in the icebreaker? And Paul, you're not going to believe this, and this is the first time I've shared this publicly, and I've got proof, which I'll show you. But I said to him, well, actually, the Soviet embassy is monitoring this phone call right now. So the fastest way is that they've heard your request. And if they can do anything, we'll hear about it pretty quickly. And sure enough, within 2 hours, into the White House Situation Room was a official message, secure message from the Soviet embassy saying that the icebreakers, there were 2 of them actually, had turned and were headed to U.S. waters to assist in the rescue of the stranded gray whales. So I'll send you that White House message. I still save that.
It's incredible. I mean,
crazy.
It's such an incredible story. I mean, it's a story that they should have made a movie of. They could make many movies of. I mean, the height of the Cold War, right? The entire world is riveted on these 3 whales, and you're at the epicenter of it in the White House with Reagan. You meet your future husband. It's one of the coolest stories I've ever heard. And for us that know you, to see it evolve and then end up on the screen. I remember the premiere. I remember seeing it. It was, and to end with your wedding was such a great celebration. And then later, Bonnie, you've had such an amazing life. You were awarded the Medal of Freedom, right? And we were all so proud of you. We were so honored to be there and celebrate you and all the work. And you're such an inspiring leader. What was that like to get the Medal of Freedom? I don't think I've ever had anybody on the show who's received the Medal of Freedom. What was that like for you?
Well, Paul, that was a recognition on the part of President Obama of all of the sacrifices that have been made by our men and women and the losses that our nation has incurred throughout these wars. So really, I was accepting it on behalf of all of our families. And what meant the most to me was that you were there, that our other partner organizations were part of all of this, that our families at home, we did we did a thing out on social media that our surviving families across the country could take selfies of themselves with the TV when the Medal of Freedom presentation was on, and then they were posting those. So really sharing in this, that it wasn't an individual award, that it was for all those who have served and sacrificed.
And who else got it the same year you did? Do you remember some of the?
Yes.
Always...
Yeah. Well, there were celebrities, and then there were, folks that were more like Katherine Johnson, who launched us to the moon.
Yeah.
And on the other side of things were Steven Spielberg, Barbara Streisand, James Taylor, Itzhak Perlman, Gloria and Emilio Estefan. Willie Mays was there.
Willie Mays, yeah.
Oh my gosh, he was amazing. He was wonderful. It was just such an honor to meet him.
So Bonnie, how do you, how do you do it? How do you deal with so much pain? And you and I have talked about this, over drinks and at events, and it's such a unique responsibility that you have and a unique weight that you carry. And I know we were talking before we went live that for me, in many ways, the last couple of months with 2 little kids and the pandemic has been some of the hardest times of my life. And I've been through some difficult times, and I know folks have it a lot harder, but for many folks, this is one of, if not the hardest time of their life. And they may be facing depression. I know I felt depressed at times. I know people are feeling isolated. What's your message for them? You're a coach, like you're a great coach for America and for individuals, but what's your message for folks right now that may be feeling down or disconnected or isolated?
We have a wonderful opportunity right now to really look into look inward and reflect on, humanity and how we can be kinder, how we can be more generous, how we can feel gratitude for the things that we do have. That, we've seen wonderful examples of people helping each other, of paying it forward, of looking for those opportunities to support folks who are right on the edge. It's a chance for us to kind of reframe what's important in our lives, to go through maybe while we're at home some of those memories that we've collected over the years, to reconnect with families, to tackle some of the tough problems that we have, and bring things to a whole nother level. It was great to see people in cities, particularly in New York City, going out at 7:00 and banging on the pots and singing and just coming together as a community, or doing the birthday, parades and convoys around neighborhoods and finding ways to honor the graduates. But that's what we can do as a society. And, when you look around the world, we have folks now in Iraq and Afghanistan and in England and Istanbul and Yemen and crazy places. And they're all finding ways that they can be a support to their community. We had a call yesterday. We're presenting again at the United Nations in Geneva as part of Geneva Peace Week. And we talk about turning war grief into positive peace. And now it's, how do we bring the humanity into the conflict zone? We have to move forward. We have to move beyond the wars and the struggle and the strife and the battles. And we have to raise the next generation in peace and security and stability with opportunity.
Can we get Biden to select you as his VP candidate? Because he said he's going to pick a woman. He hasn't talked about anybody with any national security experience. So maybe we could do a draft body campaign. He'd win Alaska. I mean, it could be.
And we saw how that went with an Alaskan. Not so good.
Bonnie, I've been talking about how this pandemic experience is unique. And I've said for a long time, there are only 2 things in my life that you understand. If you can only understand them if you've experienced them. And for a long time, it was combat and it was parenthood. Like, unless you experienced it personally, I didn't think you understood. But now I put pandemic in there, right? Like, unless you've lived through a pandemic. But we are living with, this ever-changing environment, and that includes Memorial Day. So Memorial Day is this month, and we are adapting, improvising, and hoping to overcome in ways that are unique. Arlington is going to be closed to visitors for the first time in my lifetime. I've spent many Memorial Days at Arlington with you and separately, and it's always a very unique bonding experience. It's always hot as hell, and we're out there sweating in the sun for hours. But one of the most powerful moments is when we leave the amphitheater and then we all walk down to Section 60. And your team, you know, is kind of like the ambassadors for Section 60 and the keepers of the flame for Section 60, where the post 9/11 folks are buried and the families come to grieve. They're not going to be able to do that this time, right? They're not going to be able to go and have a drink or say a prayer or bring the kids to the tombstone. And that's profound in my view, right? And that's going to be happening around the country. So I know IAVA is going to do Go Silent again, and I'm encouraging people to do that and take a minute to go silent. But can you talk about what TAPS is going to be doing for Memorial Day and how you're adapting to this environment?
Great, Paul. Well, we are doing our national seminar again, and we've got thousands of family members who are coming together virtually, and it kicked off already, and it's going really well. So we will be running that throughout the weekend. We are part of, believe it or not, there are 2 parades that are happening also kind of virtually, and they're going to be telecast on Monday as well. So there are many, many ways that we can honor. But for our families, you know, we're actually, those who always came to Washington to be with TAPS, it is a little bit of a gift that many of them get to be home at their home cemeteries that may allow them to go just maybe 1 or 2 of small family groups and to go and visit their loved ones. So, you know, it's a time to be in your local community, and we do the best that we can, but it is a different time.
I always remember when Admiral Mullen was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you and I have been, you know, honored to work with him and know him and be around him. And I remember, you know, seeing him in his Navy dress whites, you know, walking down. He's so tall, he's like 6'6" or something, right? And all these families would come and go, and occasionally presidents would come and go, but he was always there, and you were always there. Barbara Starr from CNN was almost always there. But it's also like a really draining thing. And my first year away from IAV, I got to be honest, like I felt a sense of relief in that, like I didn't have to work that day in the same way I did. So this might be the only way we can get you to take Memorial Day off. Yeah. And you're not going to take it off, but to stop you from running around and taking on so much, it would only take a pandemic to slow you down. So, but of course, you're figuring out ways to move it forward. Can you talk about, I think one of the most profound things that you do at TAPS are the Good Grief Camps. And we were around for the Iraq and Afghanistan Deployment Impact Fund, one of, if not the biggest philanthropic effort. We both got funding from the great David Gelbaum, who we tragically lost, but really left this legacy. And you created these good grief camps that I think are so important and inspiring, and for folks that want to see the resilience of people, and especially of young people and of Americans. Can you talk about those good grief camps and the kids that you all serve and work with?
Oh, it's amazing, Paul. Thank you for asking. It's my absolute favorite. Yeah. And, you know, normally we have to cap it at about 500 kids because we bring in 500 military mentors. These are active duty service members, veterans, reservists, who we train to work with a bereaved child. We pair them one-on-one and then put them into their age groups, and the magic happens. I mean, it's really extraordinary. I think last year we actually went way beyond the 500, and we had about I don't know, 650, which I think that equals like 1,300 kids and mentors, plus all of the facilitators. And they do age-appropriate coping strategies. They connect with others and learn that they're not alone. They get this connection to a military mentor, so they're kind of relearning that military life, but now not as a dependent child. Now they are in a legacy of American service and sacrifice, and in their own right. They go to visit the monuments, and they get to see how America honors all those who have served and died, that's how their loved one, regardless of how or where they died, that's how they are honored, and that's how their family is revered by this country. But we have kids now that have grown up in the Good Grief Camp. We have a boy that came to TAPS in a stroller as just a little baby, and he's now 21 years old and a legacy mentor, which is awesome. So kids that graduate out of Good Grief Camp come back, and they're mentors as well. But it's a really fantastic program, and it's become a family. It's become a tribe.
It's such a profound legacy. And I know, you know, so many times I've gotten an email or a text, or I got one today that I haven't even talked to you about, where a friend said, hey, I have a family member who lost someone. what do? And I say, go to TAPS, right? And then sometimes they say they're reluctant. And when I can't get through to them and I can't get them, they say, I'm okay, or I don't. First of all, you all have a level of expertise that I think is very important to highlight. Nobody knows the bureaucracy, the process, and the science, the emotion, the finance. It's a very complicated thing to go through, and you need a guide to take you through it. But I also, when I can't get through to them, Bonnie, I say, look, you may not want to do it for yourself, but think about someone else who's going to go through this in a year or in 6 months or 10 years or 20 years from now. They're going to need you. And that sometimes is the one thing that keeps them hanging on and keeps them reaching out to you, is the idea that it's not about them, but that they can help someone else through that profound and deep time. So I wanted to make sure, I told you that and folks heard that, because even in those darkest moments, and people are having a lot of dark moments right now, like we need you and TAPS needs you. And if you have nowhere else to go and nothing else to do, like the kids of TAPS need you. And there will be kids always that will need you. And I think it's such an important keeper of the flame. Like TAPS is a keeper of the flame for America. I've talked before, if America was a religion, the veterans would be like the clergy, right? And TAPS are like the super elite clergy. I don't even know what the comparison is, but it's such an important role. And you bring so much happiness, Bonnie, even in this conversation. Maybe people were like, oh, it's going to be Memorial Day, it's going to be a downer. And then you meet Bonnie Carroll, this force of nature that brings happiness. So I want to ask you a question I ask of all of our guests. Bonnie Carroll, what makes you happy?
Oh, being with our families and Paul, actually, just having this opportunity to share our story with you and this mission, it is absolutely wonderful. Just to hear the impact that the work that we do can bring into a life, that we have family members who didn't think they were going to make it, who were really, really struggling. And they reached out and they called our helpline, which is 24/7. They reach out at 2:00 in the morning. And when I happened to take one of those calls a while back, at the end of the call, this woman said, I've had this number sitting right there by my nightstand. And I knew if I ever needed someone really, really bad who would understand, you would be there. And what an awesome responsibility. And that just fills my heart with so much joy that we've created this safe space where all those who are grieving a military loss. And now everybody, please check out taps.org/COVID and then /together, because there's a tremendous amount of support and love and resource there, information that's open to everybody. So it really, really makes me happy that we have built this family that's now there to embrace all those who are grieving.
Yeah, you were built for this moment, right? Like all that pain and all that tough stuff is now put you in a position not just to care for the grieving families, but a grieving nation, right? And I can go into politics more than you can, but like I think after Trump, we're all going to be grieving a little bit, right? And we might need a consoler in chief like Biden to help us deal with that pain as a nation. And now it's compounded by the pain of COVID that is so significant and so severe. But Bonnie, what do you do in those moments where you're under tremendous pressure or you're in a combat zone? You go to combat zones around the world. How do you, is there a little escape you have? Is it music or food or something? What's your little like life hack in that you can share with others, or that works for you, that helps you stay a bit away from the work or find that moment?
Oh gosh, Paul, that's beautiful. It was interesting, and especially when I spent a year in Baghdad, Iraq, and I'm Christian, but to hear the Muslim call to prayer each day, and to just take that time to be quiet, to listen to the sounds around you, if possible, to be in a really beautiful place and just appreciate that moment in time, because they're fleeting. And I'll never forget the full moon over the palace in Baghdad and how beautiful that was, or the moon on the Tigris. And there are moments of beauty wherever we are. And if we can just pause for a moment every day and be present in our place, in our environment, and feel that and be grateful for it. And really marvel that the leaves are out now on the trees, that the flowers are blooming. And amidst all of this pain and chaos and loss and sadness, that life is going on, and there are things to be grateful for.
I love that. You are a tremendous reason for us all to be grateful for. And I was out on a walk with Ryder yesterday, and we're, you know, exploring. It's spring, right? And I tell him that same thing. Look for those moments of beauty. And I saw a bird's nest, and I thought I knew what it was. And I said to him, I was like, buddy, let's go over here and look inside. And I said, do you know what's inside? He said, no. And I thought it was going to be what it was. And I lifted him up, and he looked down, and it was 4 brilliant blue robin's eggs.
Wow.
You know, that unique blue that only those types of eggs have. And he had never seen it in his life in person. And so that moment where he saw it, and it almost doesn't look real, but the majesty of it and the wonder of it was so important. And it will be, you know, when I look back on the pandemic, folks say to me, you know, kids aren't going to remember one thing you did or whether they took a class. They're going to remember how you made them feel, right? And how they felt in that time, if they felt safe, if they felt wonder. And I'm trying to find those little moments for my son where he can have that wonder. And he hopefully remembers about this time he saw bright blue robin's eggs for the first time in his life. It wasn't about wearing a mask. It was about that moment. So that's what you've taught me and so many others. And I am so profoundly grateful for all that you do and all that you are. And I have to present you with some gifts, because as is tradition on the show. So I am going to present you with the gifts that come to all of our guests. Now, the first is pretty straightforward. I've got some Angry Americans gear for you, made in America by the veterans of Oscar Mike, who I know you know. So I'm gonna send that over to you. It'll be en route. And then I've also got, you're gonna love this stuff. Bravo Sierra is a sponsor of our show, and they've got antibacterial wipes and soaps, and they've got a new deodorant that is unscented, which is coming by popular demand. You're going around the world, so I'll get you some of this. You can shove it in your bag.
Thanks, Paul. I love it.
And then I always pick an American whiskey, and if you don't want to drink it, you can give it to someone else. And I actually went into the liquor store all PPD'd up, because I did it 1 month. I bought it. The guy thought I had a drinking problem because I bought so much liquor for all my guests coming up. But I looked for a bottle that speaks to me, and I found this one, which is Springbrook. It's a Springbrook high rye straight whiskey from the Springbrook Distillery, which is actually in upstate New York. So I'm trying to represent for New York Tough, but it has a moose on it.
I love it.
You can see, and folks listening, it's got a moose on it. And I couldn't find Alaskan whiskey, but I thought the moose was such a strong, beautiful, majestic representation of America, and so are you.
Oh.
And because it's Memorial Day, I'm also going to throw in, I found an American flag flask that you can put in, that I'm going to put in there. You can put your latte in it if you don't want to drink whiskey. And then the final piece, which is custom in our show, which our listeners know, is from the beginning, we've had Peeps, the Easter treats, and there are 3 colors, yellow, pink, and blue. And my final real question for you, Bonnie, is which color would you choose and why? Yellow, blue, or pink?
You know, my go-to, my first thought was the blue, because, you know, we've just done so much now with the Turning Blue for supporting our first responders and everything. If you look at our website, we've got that great picture of the Empire State Building when it went blue. And I think we have an awful lot to thank for those who have stepped forward and protected us during this time. But I love Peeps, and I love all of those, and I love the moose. That's fantastic.
Well, we love you, and I can think of nobody better. In some ways, Memorial Day is obviously about honoring the folks we've lost, right, in combat, and the fallen. And this country is losing so many people now, more than we lost in Vietnam. And it's a time of where almost every day feels like Memorial Day. And I could think of nobody better than you to help guide us through that, and guide us through it with positivity and with power and with optimism. And you are truly, I think, the finest public servant that I know. I talk about inspiring important and iconic Americans, and you fit that bill more than anyone I've known. So it's been a tremendous honor to know you and to have you on this show. And I just want all of America to know about you and to root for you like we all do who love you. But thank you for all that you do, especially on weekends and times like this. I think that your reward will be that you'll be called on even more. So the country's going to get to know you even more in the years to come. But Bonnie, I am so grateful for you, and thank you for all that you do and for joining me on the show.
God bless you, Paul. And I love you so much. And thank you for always having our back.
You got it. Always will. I'll let you get back to a lot of work you have to do coming up. Folks will check out taps.org, follow Bonnie Carroll on Twitter, and look for her in the movies. She is, she should be celebrated as a movie star, and you'll find out the amazing story of Bonnie Carroll that continues to unfold. My dearest thanks to you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Paul.